I am the fresh successor to this firm. Those phrases resounded across the opulent meeting chamber of Peterson Ventures like a storm on a sunny afternoon. The whole council pivoted at once to confront the origin of that absurd declaration. A 16-year-old African-American youth positioned at the doorway with a worn knapsack over her arms and footwear that had known superior times. Richard Peterson, the affluent head executive seated at the forefront of the oak desk, emitted a chuckle so boisterous it caused the gems on the light fixture to jingle. "You Heir." He shifted to the fellow leaders, brushing aside a droplet from chortling so intensely. "Lass, you oughtn't even be on this level." Alexis Williams inhaled deeply, her gaze surveying each countenance in the space, all Caucasian, all masculine, all donning outfits that priced more than an annual lease in her district. Yet there existed something in her stance, a composure atypical for one who ought to have felt daunted. "My title is Alexis Williams," she reiterated. This occasion with a resolve that sliced the amusement like a dagger. "And I've arrived to assert my legitimate legacy from this enterprise." The finance head, James Crawford, fixed his spectacles and grumbled something regarding those folks to his associate. The remark didn't escape Alexis, but she merely grinned, a grin that failed to touch her gaze. 6 months prior to the spectacle, Alexis had existed in an utterly distinct existence. The offspring of a janitor and nurtured by her grandma following her mom's premature demise. She never envisioned she would uncover she was the child of Thomas Peterson, Richard's junior sibling and joint creator of the enterprise. Thomas had perished in a vehicle mishap when she was merely 2 years old, carrying with him all the mysteries concerning her parentage. "Here, lass," Richard arose, his commanding stature projecting a gloom over her. "I ignore what scheme you're attempting to execute, but I recommend you depart here before I summon guards." Alexis unzipped her aged knapsack and extracted a discolored directory. "Before you perform that, you might desire to examine this." The leaders swapped skeptical stares as she positioned papers on the desk. But as Richard gathered the sheets, his visage started to lose hue. "Genetic exam, natal record, testament." "Unfeasible," he whispered, his palms quivering nearly invisibly. Thomas never informed you about his child." Alexis inclined her head, simulating astonishment. "How odd." "Because he rendered it quite evident in his testament that if anything occurred to him, I ought to obtain my portion of the enterprise when I reached 16. The quiet in the space was so dense you could perceive the clicking of the European timepiece on the barrier. Alexis observed each response, each tiny display of alarm on the countenances around the desk. It was as though she were perusing a volume she already memorized. James Crawford coughed anxiously. "Even if these papers are authentic, a juvenile cannot presume a legacy with appropriate judicial advocacy," Alexis cut him off mildly. "And it merely occurs that I already possess that managed." Richard gripped his hands, his visage scarlet with fury. "You believe you can merely appear here from oblivion?" And from oblivion, Alexis grinned once more, and this occasion there existed something perilous in that grin. "Mr. Peterson, I didn't appear from oblivion. I've been readying for this instant for months, and I possess an inquiry. Do you truly think I would arrive here without being utterly sure of my entitlement?" While all gazed at her with a blend of astonishment and disdain, Alexis preserved a tranquility that solely exists in those who have confronted far harsher gales and survived to recount the tale. There before all the skeptical stares, she remained steadfast like one protecting a mystery too potent to be unveiled before the proper moment. If you're relishing this tale of a youth who defied a whole business realm, remember to join the feed to discover how an ordinary lass from the outskirts was about to re-author the guidelines of a contest they believed they grasped so well. Richard Peterson scrutinized the papers with the caution of one examining proof in a tribunal, but his palms quivered mildly, a particular that did not escape Alexis. The genetic exam was undeniable, dated 3 months prior, conducted in an accredited facility. The authentic natal record distinctly noted Thomas Peterson as the parent. This, he elevated the sheets dismissively, could be fabricated. Anyone with entry to the web can. You can contact Genesis facility and verify it, Alexis cut in serenely, reciting the procedure code from recollection. Confirmation Code 7834B. They maintain logs for 5 years. The uneasy quiet that ensued was shattered by James Crawford, who coughed anxiously, even if it is authentic, alas of your origins. Certainly doesn't comprehend the intricacies of managing an enterprise of this magnitude. Alexis inclined her head, a scarcely noticeable grin emerging at the edge of her mouth. My origins? Could you be more precise, Mr. Crawford? Are you alluding to the reality that I'm African American, impoverished, or both? I didn't utter that, he responded swiftly, his visage crimson. You didn't need to utter it. It's been inscribed all over your countenance since I entered here, she responded with a composure that rendered all uneasy. Richard pounded the papers down on the desk. Hear, hear, lass. Even if Thomas truly is your parent, that doesn't signify you possess the entitlement to appear here 15 years subsequently demanding anything. 14 years, she rectified mildly. He perished when I was 2. The rectification annoyed him even further. Richard arose, proceeding to the expansive pane that provided a vista of the metropolis. You believe you can merely appear here and assert something you didn't construct? That you don't comprehend. It was at that instant that Alexis unveiled the initial card in her grasp. Truly, Mr. Peterson, I comprehend quite well. For instance, I grasp that Peterson Ventures is confronting a national legal action for ethnic bias in employment. I grasp you forfeited 3 major agreements this year due to variety matters, and I grasp the council is urging for substantial alterations in management. Richard's mouth gaped. James Crawford nearly suffocated on his breath. How did a youth from the outskirts grasp secret data that scarcely spread in the management hallways? How did you? Richard commenced. But Alexis proceeded unyieldingly. I also grasp that Thomas didn't merely perish in a vehicle mishap as you've invariably uttered. He was arriving to collect me from childcare when it occurred. He had been collecting me every Tuesday and Thursday for 2 years devoutly since my mom perished. Her tone stayed firm, but there existed an ancient ache behind the phrases. Personnel head Michael Torres, who had stayed quiet until then, murmured to his associate beside him, how does she grasp that? Alexis pivoted to him with the accuracy of detection. Because unlike you, I performed my research, Mr. Torres. I conversed with the childcare proprietor, located images, found individuals who labored here at the period. You believe you obliterated Thomas from the firm's records, but you overlooked that actual individuals recall actual individuals. Richard pivoted away from the pane, his countenance a veil of scarcely managed fury. Even if all of this is authentic, you're a juvenile. You can't assume business duties. Authentic. Alexis assented. But I can possess a judicial protector act on my behalf until I reach 18. One with expertise in business oversight and deep awareness of the records of Peterson Ventures. James Crawford chuckled sourly. And where precisely would you locate one like that? Who would desire to link with? He halted midway as the workspace entrance unsealed. An opulent African-American lady, roughly 45 years old, entered with the assurance of one who grasps every centimeter of that structure. She donned an flawless outfit and bore a hide portfolio that appeared to hold the burden of the globe. Apologies for disrupting, she uttered, her tone slicing the atmosphere like keen fabric. I'm Margaret Collins, prior deputy head of activities at Peterson Ventures. I labored straight with Thomas Peterson for 8 years before resolving to pursue other paths. The blood depleted from Richard's countenance. Margaret Collins, the brilliant manager he had compelled out 3 years prior with a lavish departure bundle, dreading she might someday jeopardize his role. Margaret, he faltered. What are you performing here? She grinned, positioning her portfolio on the desk beside Alexis. I arrived to encounter my fresh patron. Alexis reached me 2 months prior. I must utter I was amazed with her inquiry into the authentic records of this enterprise. Alexis stayed positioned, but now there existed something distinct about her stance. No longer was she a youth solitary against a business realm. Now she was a youth with a potent partner who grasped all the filthy mysteries of that location. 2 months, Richard reiterated. Reality commencing to shape in his intellect like a gale mist. Truly, 3, Alexis rectified once more, her tone acquiring a fresh resolve. It required me a while to locate Margaret, but it was valued every instant, particularly when she informed me about the actual conditions that led Thomas to travel solitary that evening. James Crawford ingested firmly. What is she discussing? Margaret unzipped her portfolio and extracted an audio capture on an aged gadget. Thomas contacted me the evening of the mishap. He was distressed by an uncovering he had made about monetary anomalies at the enterprise. He uttered he was going to confront one at the workspace before collecting his child. The quiet in the space was so dense you could perceive the climate control humming. Richard had turned utterly ashen. He never reached the workspace, Margaret proceeded. The mishap occurred 3 segments before. Quite handy, don't you believe? Alexis observed each response, each tiny display of alarm on the countenances around the desk. For months, she had readied for this instant, collecting proof, linking points that no one ever believed a lass from the outskirts would be able to link. You believed you had interred Thomas along with his mysteries, she uttered, her tone soft, but laden with a power that no university credential could bestow. You believed an orphan kid would never possess the assets or wit to exhume the verity. What these influential males didn't grasp was that belittling Alexis Williams had been the initial deadly error of many yet to arrive. And while they wrestled with the reality that their meticulously built account was disintegrating, she was already 3 maneuvers forward, readying a final move that would transform that meeting chamber into the platform for an equity she had awaited 15 years to witness delivered. The audio capture Margaret positioned on the desk appeared too tiny to hold 15 years of interred mysteries. Richard gazed at the gadget as if it were an explosive about to detonate, which in a manner it was. You can't demonstrate anything with an aged capture, he uttered, but his tone had forfeited all its prior power. Thomas was distressed in those final few months. All recognized that. Alexis inclined forward, her digits rapping mildly on the desk, a motion that appeared informal, but caused James Crawford to ingest when he observed the rhythmic design. It was code signals. The lass was transmitting a message in code signals. Distressed, she reiterated, feigning to ponder the term. It's fascinating that you employ that term, Mr. Peterson, because that's precisely what Thomas uttered to Margaret on that capture, that he was distressed by what he had uncovered in the ledger volumes. Michael Torres, the head of personnel, attempted to intercede. Look, youngster, merely because you're Thomas's child doesn't signify you can appear here issuing charges. Charges? Alexis cut in, her tone preserving that perilous serenity. I haven't issued any charges yet. I'm merely sharing details. She halted, surveying each countenance. But since you raised it, Mr. Torres, would you desire me to clarify why my natal record vanished from clinic logs? 3 days following Thomas's demise, the quiet that ensued was so dense you could perceive the climate control ventilator. Torres parted and sealed his mouth like a fish beyond liquid. Margaret grinned icily. Oh, yes, I overlooked to note. Alexis has been quite meticulous in her probe. Inform them about the other papers that vanished. Alexis unzipped her knapsack once more, this occasion extracting a device. Over the prior 6 months, I've located 17 papers linked to Thomas Peterson that were misplaced, displaced, or harmed in diverse state sections. Quite odd considering they were electronic files with automatic reserves. She glided her digit across the display displaying a thorough chart. But here's something fascinating. All of these mishaps occurred within a 48-hour span, invariably on Friday middays when fewer individuals were laboring. Richard attempted to chuckle, but the noise that emerged was more like a choked murmur. That's youthful suspicion. Is it? Alexis wrapped another file on the device. Because I also uncovered that an enterprise called Clearwater Answers obtained electronic filing advisory agreements from the metropolis during the identical intervals. An enterprise that fascinatingly has Richard Peterson noted as a minor equity holder. The blood depleted utterly from Richard's countenance. James Crawford loosened his neckwear, perspiring evidently. Michael Torres gazed at the entrance as if computing his odds of getaway. Margaret observed all with the contentment of one observing an adversary tumble into a snare she assisted construct. "Alexis," she uttered mildly. "Inform them about Mr. Davidson." For an instant, all the males in the space appeared to overlook how to inhale. "Robert Davidson," Alexis assented, referring her device once more. "Senior ledger keeper at Peterson Ventures from 1998 to 2008, accountable for the accounts Thomas was examining on the evening of his demise." She gazed up, encountering Richard's horrified stare, dismissed 2 weeks following Thomas's burial for unspecified anomalies. "Relocated to another province right away." Richard attempted to rise, but his limbs yielded, and he positioned back down firmly. "How? How did I locate Davidson?" Alexis grinned for the initial occasion since she had entered that space, but it was a grin that failed to touch her gaze. "Digital platforms is an astonishing instrument, Mr. Peterson, particularly when you grasp what inquiries to pose and possess sufficient time to perform the appropriate inquiry." She pivoted the device so all could view the display. An image of a middle-aged fellow positioned in a bistro, evidently conversing with one across the desk. The date in the lower right angle displayed merely 3 weeks prior. "Davidson was quite assistive," Alexis proceeded casually, "particularly after I clarified that I wasn't concerned in ruining his fresh existence, merely in locating the verity about my parent. He still possessed duplicates of all." Margaret unzipped her portfolio and extracted a pile of sheets. 10 years of modified monetary accounts, imaginary agreements, phony bills, an organized funds cleansing activity that diverted more than $20 million from the enterprise over the decade. 23,400,000, Alexis rectified accurately. To be precise, divided between profiles at 3 distinct financial institutions, all managed by a web of facade enterprises. James Crawford was breathing rapidly. That's unfeasible." "We never what?" Alexis inquired innocently. "Never believed anyone would uncover. Never pictured a lass from the outskirts would possess the wit to link the points, or never anticipated Davidson to retain proof." Richard attempted one final frantic ploy. "Even if that's authentic, you're still a juvenile. You can't." "I can't manage an enterprise." Alexis assented. "But I can, with the appropriate judicial direction, commence a complete investigative review of all Peterson Ventures' monetary activities for the final 15 years. I can also submit national offender grievances for deceit, misappropriation, and plot." She halted, relishing the instant like one savoring superior vintage. "And I can perform all of that by going communal with all the recorded proof I've assembled, including the captures of our dialogues today." "Captures?" Michael Torres faltered. "What captures?" Alexis discreetly contacted a tiny gadget affixed to the band of her knapsack. A crimson glow blinked quietly. "Oh, this tiny item. It's lawful to capture dialogues in the province when you're a juvenile and recording possible deceit against you. I referred 3 distinct attorneys to ensure." The males around the desk appeared like figures of mineral, immobile, ashen, and gradually disintegrating under the burden of their own unveiled conceit. Margaret sealed her portfolio with a gratifying snap. "Alexis, I believe it's time to unveil our ultimate offer to them." "Our offer?" Richard whispered, his tone nearly unheard. Alexis arose gradually, her stance emitting a power that contrasted sharply with her age. For months, she had schemed every maneuver, foreseen every response, readied every counterstrike. What these influential males did not yet grasp was that the defenseless youth they had belittled was about to provide them a selection that none of them were ready to confront. "Gentlemen," she uttered, her tone slicing the atmosphere like a keen edge. "The time has arrived to debate the conditions of my compassion." As the leaders wrestled between alarm and skepticism, Alexis remained there as the hub of a tempest she herself had formed, grasping that the genuine gale was yet to arrive. Because what none of them distrusted was that all that had been unveiled so far was merely the preparation for the genuine overthrow she had schemed. A strike that would not only restore her legacy, but utterly re-author the authority framework of that enterprise that believed it could inter the verity along with her parent. My offer is quite straightforward, Alexis uttered, proceeding gradually around the desk like a hunter who had at last trapped its quarry. You can depart willingly, restore the pilfered funds, and openly admit your offenses. Or what? Richard hollered, his tone breaking under the burden of hopelessness. You're merely a kid. No one will regard you gravely. Alexis grinned, wrapping the tiny gadget in her knapsack once more. Truly, Mr. Peterson, our dialogue has been transmitted real-time for precisely 43 minutes. The quiet that ensued was total. Not even the climate control dared to generate a noise. Transmitted real-time. James Crawford murmured, his countenance turning a concerning tint of ash. Margaret unsealed her device and pivoted the display so all could view. On the display, a video platform stream showed real-time uncover graphed at Peterson Ventures with over 47,000 watches and remarks growing by the instant. 17,543 individuals have observed you admit to business deceit in the final 5 minutes, Alexis reported casually, referring her device, including several quite fascinating individuals. Richard attempted to rise, but his limbs failed him. You can't. This is unlawful. Truly, it's utterly lawful. A commanding tone resounded from the doorway. 3 national operatives entered the space, trailed by 2 area law investigators. I'm National Operative Sarah Martinez. Alexis Williams arrived to us 2 weeks prior with proof of business deceit and funds cleansing. The primary operative neared the desk surveying the dispersed papers. We possess detention orders for Richard Peterson, James Crawford, and Michael Torres. No. James abruptly arose, attempting to dash for the entrance. One of the investigators effortlessly blocked him, restraining him as he grumbled incoherently about miscommunications and referring attorneys. Michael Torres had entered total astonishment, positioned immobile as droplets flowed quietly down his countenance. My kin, he murmured. My offspring will view this on the web. Richard, however, was still attempting to preserve some management. You can't demonstrate anything. A defiant youth with fabricated papers. Alexis unzipped her knapsack one final occasion, extracting a distinct device. Recall Mr. Davidson, our contrite ledger keeper. Well, he didn't merely retain duplicates of the monetary papers. She activated play on a captured footage. The picture displayed Richard Peterson in his workspace 3 years prior, evidently directing Davidson on how to conceal unlawful shifts. The sound quality was pristine. Ensure nothing can be linked back to me. Richard's tone resounded in the space. If anyone uncovers, you assume all the fault. I possess too much safeguard to descend for a few million. The blood depleted utterly from Richard's countenance. That was extracted from setting. We possess 14 hours of comparable captures, Operative Martinez notified him, assenting to her associates. Mr. Davidson was quite meticulous in recording his engagements with you after grasping he was being employed as a fall guy. As the operatives neared Richard, he at last forfeited all poise. You don't grasp who you're confronting, he hollered at Alexis. I possess links, sway. I will ruin you and your kin of ghetto residents. The bigoted remark was the final trigger. The transmission chat detonated with indignation and watches leaped to over 80,000. Remarks requiring equity grew by the instant. Alexis, however, preserved her honorable serenity. Mr. Peterson, in a few moments, your enterprise will be assumed by national overseers. Your individual profiles will be immobilized, and this footage of you labeling an African-American kin ghetto residents real-time will be viewed by millions of individuals. She halted, observing him being restrained. But the genuine sarcasm is that my parent, Thomas, left quite precise directions in his authentic testament. The one you attempted to ruin, but Davidson retained a duplicate of directions on how the enterprise ought to be managed if anything occurred to him. Margaret grinned, extracting one final paper from her portfolio. Thomas predicted that Richard would attempt to pilfer his child's legacy, so he established a faith fund with 51% of the enterprise's equity, which could solely be retrieved by Alexis when she reached 16. 51%. Richard reiterated, skeptical. A total majority, Alexis verified. Which signifies that lawfully I am the fresh managing proprietor of Peterson Ventures. And my initial choice as proprietor is to dismiss you all for valid reason and litigate each of you for deceit and misappropriation. James Crawford, still restrained, commenced to weep. I possess a kin, a loan. Please. You ought to have pondered that before pilfering $23 million. Alexis responded impassively. As the leaders were led out of the space, Richard pivoted one final occasion. You may have succeeded today, but alas, like you will never be able to manage an enterprise like this. Alexis confronted him. Mr. Peterson, alas, like me just unveiled a 15-year plot, assembled proof the FBI couldn't locate in a decade, and broke apart your offender realm with a device and an aged knapsack. She halted, her grin at last displaying a spark of contentment. I believe I can manage a few charts. As the entrance sealed behind the detained offenders, the real-time transmission stayed active. The remarks were a blend of indignation at the graft that had been unveiled and respect for Alexis' wit and valor. Margaret sealed her device and observed Alexis, who stayed oddly serene for one who had just transformed her whole existence. How do you sense? She queried mildly. Alexis gazed out the expansive pane, observing the metropolis extend below. I sense like my parent can at last repose in tranquility. What no one on the real-time transmission or even Margaret grasped yet was that Alexis's genuine payback extended far past unveiling Richard Peterson. What she had uncovered about her parents' demise and the scheme she had formed to truly commemorate his recollection was merely commencing to develop. And it would alter not only Peterson Ventures, but the whole society that had been overlooked by decades of business avarice. 6 months following the day that altered all, Alexis Williams positioned in the identical meeting space where she had been mocked. But now the desk was filled with fresh countenances, skilled leaders of varied ethnicities whom she had individually engaged. Peterson Ventures, retitled Williams Peterson Entity, had become the swiftest expanding enterprise in the sector. Under Margaret Collins' management as head executive and with Alexis supervising tactical choices, the enterprise had not only reclaimed the pilfered $23 million, but had tripled its earnings by enacting revolutionary moral methods. Richard Peterson, meanwhile, served a 15-year penalty for business deceit and funds cleansing. The footage of his bigoted real-time remark had spread rapidly, viewed by over 10 million individuals, and resulting in his total societal dismissal. James Crawford had forfeited his residence, his kin, and proclaimed insolvency after civic legal actions. Michael Torres now labored as a vendor in a retail outlet, his business profession ruined eternally. The gathering with the financiers was a triumph, Margaret reported, grinning at Alexis. They desire to broaden our university grant program for youths from underserved societies. Alexis assented, gazing out the identical pane where Richard used to display his authority. Now she viewed kids toying in the fresh green space the enterprise had sponsored on the location of the prior vacant workspaces. You grasp what's sarcastic, she uttered, pivoting to Margaret. Richard devoted his entire existence attempting to keep individuals like us out of authority. In the conclusion, it was a lass from the outskirts who constructed the realm he invariably envisioned of possessing. Alexis's mobile buzzed with an alert. It was a note from Davidson, the prior ledger keeper who had supplied the vital proof. He was completing Judicial Academy funded by the fresh Thomas Peterson establishment for second opportunities. Alexis grinned, storing her device. She had discovered that genuine payback was not ruining her foes. It was constructing something so remarkable that their spite became utterly insignificant. That youth who had entered a meeting chamber with an aged knapsack had demonstrated something essential. Belittling one based on bias is not merely ethically incorrect, it's tactically foolish. In the conclusion, Richard Peterson was not vanquished by animosity or uprising. He was vanquished by wit, readiness, and a young lady who transformed every hindrance into energy for something superior. The finest payback, Alexis had uncovered, is to attain triumph that your oppressors could never picture, and to employ that triumph to form chances that they attempted to refuse others. If this tale moved your spirit and demonstrated you that wit invariably triumphs over conceit, join the feed for more tales of individuals who transformed unfairness into motivating triumphs.